Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Corey Hall. I am publisher and editor-in-chief of BachScholar Publishing. I'm a pianist, a piano teacher, and an independent scholar. This video is divided up into 3 segments that you can find below this video. So if you click on one of those timings, it will bring you to the proper section of the video. We have the introduction, which is this section. The next section is an examination of Bach's first edition of the Goldberg variations viewed on IMSLP. And the third section is a breakdown of Bach's overall temporal organization of the variations based on many years of research, which is actually the groundbreaking discovery, which I'm going to talk about today. I have in front of me here BachScholar's new edition of J.S. Bach's Goldberg variations based on groundbreaking performance practice research. It is a beautiful edition, and it looks like this. It has a nice preface here in which I explain a few things about Bach's notation, particularly with his notation as it applies to his tempo relationships between variations. This is what I'll explain on the whiteboard in the third section of this video. And it also presents the Goldberg variations in a very beautiful, ultra-legible manuscript here. It's actually more legible than most other editions. It looks like this. Beautiful hard copy edition, also available in PDF. So you may order your copies from the links below this video. Back in 1992, when I was a graduate student at the University of Kansas pursuing a master's degree in musicology and a doctor of musical arts and performance, I was working on Bach's Goldberg variations. And at the time, I was using the Peters edition from 1937. And this is the exact edition I used back in 1992 or the early 90s when I was learning it. The cover has since fallen off. This is published by C.F. Peters, 1937. It's a nice Urtext edition. Looks like this. And it took me probably a year or so to learn these. And a few months after learning them, it probably took me 6 months before I even noticed this peculiarity about the notation. I noticed something very strange, that after some variations, the Peters edition indicated fermatas, like here's a fermata after the aria, here's a fermata after variation 1, there's no fermata after variation 2, and then there's no fermata after variation 3, no fermata after variation 4, but then there is a fermata after variation 5. After variation 6, no fermata. After variation 7, no fermata. After variation 8, there is a fermata. After variation 9, no fermata. After variation 10, there is a fermata. After variation 11, no fermata. After variation 12, there is a fermata. And I thought, when I first saw this back in 1992, I thought, oh, Peters is probably making a mistake. They probably just forgot to put the fermatas there, because this is what other editions did, like the Henley. If you look at the Henley edition has fermata after every variation. There's fermatas there's always a fermata after every variation. And I thought, well, this is strange. Why does Peters only indicate some fermatas, but other reputable editions such as Henley and other Urtext editions that I checked also had fermatas after every variation? In fact, Peters was the only edition I could find Maybe there are more, but it's the only one I could really find, or the ones I looked at, that omits fermatas after some variations. All of the other editions add fermatas where Peters didn't have them. Well, this meant only one thing. I have to check the original manuscript. So I went to the library and I found a facsimile of Bach's first edition of the Goldberg Variations from 1741. That's what I'll show you today in the second segment of this video. And to my surprise, Bach's original manuscript in his own hand, the first edition, did indeed omit fermatas after some of the variations, exactly the way Peters' edition has it. So in terms of the Bach's fermata placement after variations, Peters is the only edition, other than my edition from 2020 here, that reproduces Bach's plan exactly as he wanted it. Why is this important? Why are the fermatas important? Well, I touched upon that issue in my 2005 article in American Music Teacher magazine. This was about 14 years after my discovery in 1992, actually about 13 years after that. And this, the article I wrote for this magazine was called Bach's Goldberg Variations Demystified. I discussed the variations mostly in the context of their pedagogical value, and I really talk less about what I'm going to talk about today in this video about the tempo relationships, but I do touch upon some of that here. So in a way, my new edition of the Goldberg Variations is sort of an offshoot or a continuation of my article from 2005. You're welcome to read that if you can find that somewhere online. So what does this mean? What does it mean that did Bach forget some of the fermatas? Did he, or did he really intend it that way? Well, at first glance, it looks like it's just an oversight. And this is why publishers like Henley just add fermatas where they don't belong. They assume Bach just meant to put fermatas after every variation, and they just add fermatas after every variation. But Kurt Soldan, on the other hand, he must have been a very fine editor because he actually saw that, well, maybe he might not know what it meant, but when you make an edition, you reproduce exactly what the composer writes. And so the fermatas that Bach indicated and the fermatas he omitted mean something. And I'll show you what that means in the next two segments of this video. So stay tuned for that. Hello, and here we are with Bach's Klavierübung, the fourth part. You can see at the top of the title page here, Klavierübung. That means simply piano practice. And he says here, piano practice consisting of an aria with various modifications, I would say, for harpsichord with two manuals, prepared for connoisseurs, Johann Sebastian Bach. There's no date on here, but it has been dated to 1741. This is the first edition of the Goldberg Variations. The first edition from 1741, and it was actually engraved by Bach himself. Isn't this a beautiful cover page? You know, they did such great, beautiful artwork back then. I'm sure Bach probably didn't do this artwork here on the side. But, so we go here, we find the aria. This is the very famous aria, the theme of the Goldberg Variations. And I just want to emphasize that this is Bach's writing. This is not a copyist's manuscript. This is actually Bach's own engraving for this. So, I think it was customary then to have engravers or to have people do it for him, but he did this all himself. So here's the aria. I'm just going to scroll through these very slowly and give my commentary. Look at, this is very important right here, where my mouse is. We see that Bach put a fermata here and a fermata here on the end of the end of the aria here. Now we're going to variation 1. This is variation 1 here. And we go through the variation. You can see right here, it's kind of faint. It's sort of faded away, but he does put a fermata here at the end of variation 1. And now we scroll a little further. We have variation 2. And look very carefully here at the end of variation 2, right here where my mouse is. We can see that there is no fermata. No fermata there. He puts volti. Volti means simply to get ready to turn the page. And we come to variation 3. And at the end of variation 3, which is right here, look very carefully, there is no fermata. There's no fermata, but there's a little, he adds this little squiggly line, this sort of whirlwind looking thing right here. It's kind of faded away. That goes directly into variation 4. So now we're on variation 4. And at the end of variation 4, note again, no fermata. But there's that same little flourish here, the squiggly line. It's not as faded as the last one. It looks really nice and artistic. Now, moving on to variation 5. We can see here going through variation 5. Finally we have a fermata. So he puts a fermata here at the end of variation 5. Now we're at variation 6. Variation 6, canon at the second. This is the second of the canons. And we're going through variation 6. And look at the end of variation 6. No fermata. No fermata there. He forgot his little squiggly line. I'm wondering, why he forgot that there. Anyway, no squiggly line, but no fermata. Now we're on variation 7. And variation 7 ends at the end of the page here. We have no fermata again. And we have that nice squiggly line flourish there. Then we go on to variation 8. And variation 8 goes on to the first line of the next page, fermata. So Bach puts a fermata here at the end of variation 8. Now, going into variation 9, we see canon at the third. So variation 9 here ends right here. No fermata, but he has a squiggly line here. Notice that whenever he has a fermata, he doesn't have a squiggly line. A couple times he forgets his squiggly line, but it's very significant that he either has a fermata or no fermata and a squiggly line. And like I said, a couple times he forgets his squiggly line. And now we go on in variation 10, and you can see there is a fermata here at the end of variation 10. Then we start variation 11. And variation 11 goes on to the next page. What do we have here? No fermata, but we have a squiggly line. You're starting to see a pattern here. Now we go on to variation 12, canon at the fourth. Volti simply means to turn the page. It's not over yet, so we need to turn the page to continue variation 12. And no squiggly line here, but we have a fermata, a nice clear fermata here at the end of variation 12. And now we go into variation 13. The title actually is below the line, not above the line. And variation 13 continues to the end of the next page, and we have a fermata here. So Bach puts a fermata at the end of variation 13. Variation 14 here goes into the next page. The end of variation 14 has a fermata right here. It's funny, the bottom fermata looks sort of like a heart, almost. It's very interesting the way he does that. Variation 15 is canon at the 5th. Canon at the 5th, and Volti, turn the page because it's continuing. At the end of variation 15, there is a fermata. That is the first half of the Goldberg variations. Then 16 with variation 16 with the overture. We have going into the next page. It starts with an overture in common time or cut time, and then goes into 3/8. So it's a sort of an allegro section in 3/8 time. After that, after variation 16, there is no fermata, but he has a little squiggly line. It's a different kind of squiggly line. It's a it's not a whirlwind like he did before, but there is no fermata there. This goes directly into variation 17. So let's see, variation 17 goes on into the next page, and there is a fermata at the end of variation 17. So it's kind of faded, but it's very clear that there is a fermata at the end of variation 17. Now we have variation 18, canon at the 6th. And there is clearly a fermata here at the end of canon at the 6th, variation 18. And this goes into variation 19. Variation 19 continues on the next page. It's kind of a short variation. And the end of variation 19, once again, we have a fermata here at the end. Now we're in variation 20. Variation 20 goes along, and there's another fermata here at the end. So he's had a lot of continuous fermatas here in the second half so far. He's had one after 17, 18, 19, and 20. Now we're in variation 21. This is the canon at the 7th. And this continues on to the next page. Look what we have here. We have no fermata at the end of variation 21. And this nice, it goes back to this very artistic looking squiggly line, this whirlwind kind of flourish. No fermata. That goes into variation 22, which is an alla breve. And that ends at the end of the page. There is a fermata here clearly. It's a little faded, but there's a fermata at the end of variation 22. Then we go into variation 23, and that continues on to the next page. At the end of variation 23, no fermata, but there is this flourish right there, the whirlwind squiggly line. We go to variation 24, canon at the octave. Variation 24 continues on to the next page, and there is a fermata clearly here at the end of variation 24. We have variation 25, and do you see this adagio indication right there? That adagio indication was added later on to Bach's personal copy. This is actually Bach's personal copy of the first edition. So there are a few editions, and one of them was this adagio here. and we'll see another addition in variation 26. So anyway, we continue through the very, very beautiful variation 25, the Adagio, variation 25. The end of variation 25, no fermata. No fermata there. He forgot his squiggly line. That's funny though. But it is significant that there is no fermata between 25 and 26. Now we're in variation 26. And we're continuing on to the next page. And clearly there is a fermata at the end of variation 26. It's a little faded and a little small, but there is a fermata there. And we move on to variation 27. Canon at the ninth. Moving through variation 27. At the end of variation 27, there is no fermata, but there is artistic flourish there. Moving on to variation 28. That's the trill variation. And he says volti here. That indicates that it's not over yet. You got to turn the page to get to the second half. And it ends here. The end of variation 28 has a fermata. It's a little faded, but it's there, definitely. We move to variation 29. Move on to the next page. It actually continues on to the page after that. Clearly a fermata after variation 29. And then the final variation, variation 30, is the quodlibet. And that ends with a fermata. It's funny, he has this fermata and a squiggly line here. That's the first time he did that. Very interesting. We'll keep that in mind. He has a fermata and a squiggly line. Probably indicates, the squiggly line here probably indicates that, because you're supposed to go back and repeat the aria. He doesn't write it out like most modern editions do, but you're supposed to just repeat the very first aria in the beginning to give it that symmetry. Aria da capo, and after that it's over. Fine, e fine. So my guess is this squiggly line here at the end with the fermata probably just indicates that he wants a break there, and it's going to but it's going to go continuously into the aria until the whole thing is finished. And then this is one of the additions here that he added to his personal copy. It's a collection of 14 canons. 14 canons. I don't even know those canons well, but I think they were discovered like in the 1970s. Very significant discovery. One of the other editions, and I forgot to say this, one of the other editions in his personal copy, which is very important and significant, that's why I'm mentioning it here, is in variation 26. You see these little tiny notes right here where I'm circling that with the mouse. There's a small note there with a little slur. And then there's a little tiny small note there. You can see it's just barely legible right here. There's a small note right here. There's a small note with a slur. Those were added actually to his personal copy. So all editions made before 1974, I believe it was 1974 that this was discovered, they do not have these small notes. Those are known as appoggiaturas. Here's another appoggiatura here. A small note with a slur, small note with a slur, small note with a slur. This is very significant, I think, and it tells us what kind of a tempo Bach had in mind for the performance because all of these added appoggiaturas, very detailed addition of appoggiaturas through this variation 26, indicates that Bach probably had a slower, more expressive tempo in mind, like a saraband tempo, not unlike the opening aria. Very significant, because usually this variation is played very, very fast. But when you start adding these appoggiaturas that Bach added, when performers start adding those, it really becomes sort of counterproductive to play it as fast as humanly possible, as it usually is. So anyway, this is the Goldberg Variations, the first edition with Bach's own additions there with the appoggiaturas and a few other minor additions. But very important is his use of fermatas, his omission and inclusion of fermatas, and his use of that squiggly line. What does this all mean? Well, I will explain what this all means in the next section of this video. Hello and welcome. I'm standing here in front of my diagram of Bach's Goldberg Variations here. It looks very complex and complicated. I'll explain this in a minute. But I just wanted to reiterate in the last section of this video, we looked at what Bach wrote. We looked at Bach's intentions. We looked at Bach's own personal copy, the first edition, engraved by Bach himself. We looked at the copy they have on IMSLP, which everyone can see. It's as clear as day that after some variations, Bach marked fermatas, after others he didn't. When he didn't mark a fermata, he usually used this little squiggly line flourish, an artistic flourish. What does this mean? What does this mean in a complete performance? Complete performances of the Goldberg Variations are pretty new, actually. They haven't been around even 100 years, I think. They became popular with performers like Wanda Landowska on harpsichord and Rosalind Turek on piano, who then influenced Glenn Gould. And so it hasn't been a long time that performers have actually attempted to play from beginning to end without stopping. That being said, it's, you can hear as many tempi as there are performances. You can hear as many tempo relationships between variations as there are performers. But is this what Bach wanted? What did Bach want? What did he intend? Well, we can figure out exactly what he intended and exactly how he conceived the variations by mapping out his fermata plan. So what I've done is I've taken the arias here. By the way, he did not have to end with the same piece as he started with. When he begins and ends with the same piece, the same theme, that tells us something. It tells us right from the beginning Bach was intending something very special and symmetrical, because there was no obligation to put that at the end. There had been theme and variations written before this time, before 1741, but I don't think any of them ever end with the same piece as it begins with. So that in itself tells us that Bach really wanted something special and symmetrical. Now, if we look at the fermatas here, I've put them after each of the variations where Bach indicated them in his hand exemplar, his own personal copy. We can see a very obvious symmetrical plan that goes outwards from the middle, the midpoint here. So we have a pair, 16 and 17. You move outwards, you have three singles. Bach could have put these anywhere, but he put them here. Bach could have put these anywhere, but he put them there, flanking the middle. What are the chances of that being a coincidence? Virtually none at all. Now you go further outwards symmetrically from the middle, from the three singles, and you have a pair here and a pair here. You go one step further, you have a pair here and a pair here. So it's up to this point, it is perfectly symmetrical. You have a pair here, you have 3 singles, you have a pair, and then you have another pair. And then moving outwards, in this way you have a group of 3 and a group of 4. And then here, moving outwards, you have another pair here and another pair here, 2 singles, and then the end. So in all, you have 7 pairs, 2 groups, 1 group of 3, 1 group of 4, and you have 9 singles. What does this mean? What was Bach thinking? Well, we know right away he was thinking long and hard before he even put this down on paper. Before he put the music down on paper, he thought long and hard how he wanted to organize it. Because something like this, something that's 90% perfectly symmetrical, doesn't happen by itself. It takes a human being to think this out. So this is what Bach was thinking. Okay, let's talk about the pairs first, the pairs of variation. Well, 16 going into 17. You have a 3/8 variation going to a 3/4 variation. If you keep the 8th note the same here, dun, da, 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 dun, 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 da, 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 that's the 8th note. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then you have that. So the 8th note here becomes the 8th note here. It's equal. That's what today we would call a metric modulation. Bach probably did not have that term in his vocabulary, but it happens a lot in this music. It's simply a metric modulation. It's a regrouping of the 8th note here. Instead of groups of 3s, you have 2 groups, or you have 3 groups of 2s in each measure here. Now, let's talk about this pair. Let's talk about this pair and this pair, 9 and 10, and 21 and 22. Okay, 9 and 10. You have a 4/4 variation going to a 2/2, or cut time, or an all a breath. If you make the quarter note of this one equal to the half note of this one, it's perfect. Works out perfectly. It makes neither one too fast or too slow. It's perfect. But yet the trick is to find the correct quarter note speed. And I will talk about that more in the Ultimate Guide volume, which I will publish later, probably next year. So, but if you take that quarter note equals half note here, you would think, oh, well, he probably wants that here also. Well, no, it doesn't work. If you try out the quarter note of 21 and then make it equal to the half note of 22, it's just one is too fast and the other is too slow. It just doesn't work out well. However, if you make the 8th note to variation 21 equal to the half note of 22, it's perfect. And this is because variation 21, canon at the 7th, is a very tragic, very cantabile, very slow variation. He doesn't give a tempo mark there, but it's in G minor. And it's very tragic, and I think most people play this too fast. So this one, the 8th note equals the half note here, and the quarter note equals the half note here. So he was attempting to create 2 kind of different tempo relationships between a 4/4 and a 2/2. He could have put these anywhere. He could have scrambled them up and put this 2/2 over here and put this 2/2 over there. But no, he happened to pair them with the only 2 of the only 4/4 variations. There's only 3 variations in 4/4. This one, and number 30. And he happened to have paired these with 2/2 variations. That cannot be a coincidence. That he wanted that. He planned those tempo relationships there. Then this is one of the most fascinating of all here is 11 and 12. Variation 11 is a 12/16. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Variation 12 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have 12 16th notes in each of the measures in both these variations. That tells us that Bach wanted, this is sort of a quasi-gigue style just by his use of the 12/16. That tells us that he wanted 12 at a pretty fast clip, that he wanted the 16th note equal here. And you know, you can get in my volume, my new edition of the Goldberg variations, I actually write out, you can see the note values written out for these, so you can get that for that. But I haven't done that here. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So it's just, you just regroup the 16th note. This is the most fascinating of all the metric modulations of all. This means you don't just stop after 11, take a pause, and then go into variation 12 at some unrelated tempo. You end variation 11. It doesn't hardly need any pause at all, and you go right into variation 12, regrouping the 16th notes at the same speed. That gives those the same tempo and the same duration of time that it takes to play them. Then we have this pair here, 23 and 24. Well, that's a no-brainer. 3, 4, 9, 8. So you have da 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 dum. You have ba 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 bum. 1, 2, 3. Dun 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 da 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 dun dun dun. Then you have your canon at the ninth here. No, I'm sorry, canon at the octave here. So the quarter note here equals the dotted quarter note in 24. I don't know very many performers that do that. It's actually one of the ones that's the most obvious. So I'd be willing to bet that there are probably a lot of performers that do that instinctually. Maybe they're not planning to do that, but they do that just because it seems like the instinctual thing to do, and that's why Bach put them together. He could have put this 9/8 anywhere. He could have coupled this 9/8 with this 12/16. If he had done that, it would have never worked out. It would have never worked out at their natural tempi. Then you have a pair here, 25 and 26. This is an adagio, the slowest one of all. And then you have 26, which is 2 times faster, which is usually played much, much too fast, I believe. This variation 26 is in the style of a sarabande. It's a different kind of sarabande than this sarabande, but regardless, they're both sarabandes. I would be willing to bet all my money that Bach wanted this sarabande here, variation 26, to be the same speed as this aria here, and that he wanted this 2 times faster as that, because there's no fermata there. So you have an extremely slow variation, the slowest one of all. Then that modulates right into a moderate speed variation, not as fast as humanly possible as it's usually played, but only a moderate. Then this goes into another pair, 27 and 28. This is a 6/8, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. If you take the 8th note, well, actually, you have to be careful, because this is the trill variation with 32nd notes. So if you can only play the 8th note in 27 as fast as you can play 4 trill notes in 28, because this one goes right into that one with no pause at all. It's really it's like a crime when I see editions that add fermatas after 27. It's just a crime, because 27 goes da 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 da, and it kind of just ends abruptly. It needs to go on. You can't stop. So you can't stop after variation 27. You have to go right into 28 and keep the 8th note the same. So if your trills in variation 28 are, I mean, you can only play trills so fast. That's the 8th note speed. Dun da 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 dum bum 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 bum. So that probably tells us that variation 27 shouldn't be as fast as everybody plays it, because I think 27 is usually played much faster than I just sang it. And then I believe that 29 is faster. That's why he put a fermata here. You stop this, you regroup, and you go to 29, which I believe is one of the fastest variations of all. So you can see that, and I'll talk about this more in my Ultimate Guide volume. You have the slowest one of all here at 25, and then you have a moderate one here, a little faster, and then that doubles its speed with the trills. That's still faster. And then you have your final quadlibet here at the end. So I believe that 29 is the fastest one of all. That it's sort of a progression that goes really slow, moderate, sort of moderate, 2 times faster, and then still faster here at 29. And he wanted that tempo progression there from here to the end, and then with the slow aria at the end there. 6, 7, and 8. Well, we have 2 6 8 times. You have a 6 8 here, a 6 8 here. This is 2 of the only 3 variations in 6 8. We have one over here too. So he could have put these anywhere, but he happened to put them together. And Bach added an al tempo di giga indication to variation 7. That tells us that he wanted 7 pretty fast, like a jig tempo. Dun, 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 dun. That tells us that he most likely wanted 6 slower, half the speed. So variation 6, canon at the second, I believe is like more of a very slow kind of cantabile, pastoral style tempo and character. That speed doubles to that, so that's 2 times faster at 6. And then variation 8, after if you take dun da dun dun da dun dun, if you take the dotted quarter note of 7, da 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 da, that actually variation 8 I believe is played much too fast. So if you go by what Bach indicated and what he was thinking when he conceived the Goldberg variations, it tells us that variation 8 is not as fast, not nearly as fast as everyone plays it. The quarter note of 8 equals the dotted quarter note of 7, and that dotted quarter note is exactly 2 times faster than the dotted quarter note in 6. That's why he put these 2 6 8s together, and this is a jig style and this is not a jig style. I believe variation 6 is usually played too fast also. That's our only 3 variation group. Then we have our only 4 variation group here. We have 2/4 time, which goes to 12/8, which goes to 3/8, which goes to 3/4. 2/4, dun da 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 da. It's nice, kind of allegro style. This is the 8th note. Dun da 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 da. So you just take the 8th note is grouped into 2s, you regroup it into 3s, and voila, you have 12/8 time. Then he changes the harmonic rhythm to a sort of a quicker harmonic rhythm in 4. Bum, 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 bum. The 8th note stays the same there. Then the 8th note stays the same going into 5. You have, this is bum, 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 bum. Then you have quarter note. Da, 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 da. Once again, variation 5 is played much too fast. We know that because Bach wanted that metric modulation that goes from 2 to 5. So I believe variations 5 and 8 are played much too fast nowadays, most likely from the influence of Glenn Gould, who played them as fast as humanly possible, including variation 26, which is played as fast as humanly possible, which is played about 2 times too fast nowadays. I can't prove it, but I believe that variation 1 is 2 times faster than the aria, and I will explain that later and elaborate upon that in my ultimate guide volume, which I'm working on. So you have variation 1 2 times faster than the aria, and so there you have it. You have an almost perfectly symmetrical plan, a master plan of organizing 30 variations. So Bach did not just sit down and compose from beginning to end and everything just happened coincidentally. I think Bach thought long and hard about how he wanted this organized, and we can see his thinking process. We can rework or figure out his thinking process by the way that he placed the fermatas. 7 pairs, 2 groups, and 9 singles. The 9 singles I'll talk about more in my ultimate guide volume, but there are some tempo relationships there. For example, 18 and 19 have a very obvious and very practical relationship, which I'll talk about in the ultimate guide volume, but I don't hear any performer doing this in their performances. They just kind of play whatever they want. They play everything as fast as possible. They don't think about things. If they had good additions, they probably, most likely, many performers probably would have seen this. Like when I saw the Peters edition back in the early 90s when I was learning the Goldbergs for the first time, I was using the Peters edition from 1937. They happened to have this all mapped out perfectly. And I looked at it and I thought, wait, shouldn't there be fermatas after all of them? Why are there only fermatas after some of them? And I investigated it. And I've known about this ever since 1992, which I'm sharing with you today for the first time on YouTube. But if you use faulty additions, including the otherwise very prestigious and highly rated Henley edition adds fermatas where they don't belong. Bärenreiter edition, another great, otherwise good edition, they add fermatas where they don't belong, where Bach did not indicate them. Virtually all editions other than the Peters edition add fermatas where they do not belong. This is why you need to purchase BachScholar's new edition, in which I edit it and I show exactly the way Bach intended the variations to be played in terms of tempo relationships. I also have a very practical tempo table in that book that you can look at. That's I'm not talking about it here because that would be beyond the point. So there you have it. You have Bach's plan for the Goldberg variations. This is what he was thinking, and I thank you for viewing this video, and until we meet again.